This is the Hour of History Cities podcast with your host, Stephen Bauman. The Hour of History Cities podcast, as well as other Hour of History podcasts, can be streamed and downloaded at hourofhistory.com, iTunes, Google Music, our YouTube channel, and TuneIn. And now we begin the Hour of History Cities podcast with your host, Stephen Bauman.
Hello, and welcome to week 6 of the Hour of History Cities podcast, talking about commodities and cities throughout Latin America. This is another substance that, sort of undermines the city because it goes beyond just one place and goes deep into a commodity trade that impacts many, many cities and many countries and many people. So this week we're just talking about cocaine and the coca leaf. But first, this episode is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Hour of History, where there's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. I like to use it for books that I don't have to read, that I just enjoy reading, like Ian Rankin's series on the sour Scottish detective Rebus. But you can download whatever books you want. Don't let me force you to do, history books, whatever. History. But this week, yes, we're talking about cocaine. Now, cocaine is sort of the pharmaceutical term. It was the coca leaf that was used typically by the indigenous people of South America. It was a leaf that was chewed for a numerous amount of qualities that helped you enjoy your life. It made your pains go away, and it made you feel good, and it didn't have any bad side effects. So the people say, like the Quechua people, they called it cuca. They chewed on the coca leaf, and it wasn't sort of a thing that was super elite. The Spanish had commercialized it in 1530, and they themselves gave it to mine workers, most of whom were indigenous. And they sort of set up this pattern of the Amerindians using it more so than anyone else because they were the ones working long hours. So this leaf that comes from a shrub that's found in the Andes mountains became an important commodity in the 1800s. The town that I'll focus on is Huanaco, and that town is important because it's a Peruvian city in the Andes that was central to sort of the emerging coca industry. So we had this commodity that's used typically only by the indigenous population, by people who are being forced to work in mines for the Spanish Empire and the newly independent South American states after they rebel against the Spanish, until the 1800s when Germans mostly and intellectuals in Europe start to discover this commodity, and they discover what it can do. So Germans start looking into the potential medical qualities it has and the way it makes people feel good and do work. So Germans are very interested in this, and they can trade with Peru, which is an independent nation. So what happens is German merchants go, one of them, Arnaldo Kitz, goes to Peru and sets up this town of Huanaco in the eastern Andes, where he can have a factory that takes this leaf and turns it into a commodity that can be sold and turned into medicine over in Germany. So really, this is just Huanaco's a launching point. This city starts the conversation, and the entire province, just German pharmaceutical interests continue to push the growth and the production of these plantations, basically, that produce what the Germans have named cocaine, which makes people feel good, especially when they have to undergo something like a medical surgery that may or may not help them in the long run, which was the case in the 19th century. Taking note from this Republic of Letters and paying attention to the German scientists, the United States and the US medicine producers also get a taste for cocaine around 1900. In fact, one company that we now know based in Atlanta, Georgia, invents Coca-Cola in which they make a drink with a secret recipe that involves some of this material that will keep you awake and make you feel good. So what happens is it continues to grow both in popularity and in sort of fame worldwide as this drug that can be consumed in tablets or injected. It's not chewed in the leaf form like it is by the indigenous people, because by this point, pharmaceutical companies in Germany and the United States and the United Kingdom have found ways to make it into smaller, more palatable things. You can take it in a pill or something like a mint. And what happens is it becomes really popular. So people like Arthur Conan Doyle write Sherlock Holmes having the hobby of, when he's not investigating any crimes, he just likes to sort of take some cocaine and pass the time. Ernest Shackleton, the British explorer who famously wanders around Antarctica, he's on cocaine a lot of the time because it keeps him awake and makes him feel presumably less cold when he's in Antarctica. Sigmund Freud describes it as an exhilaration, lasting long, euphoria that's natural euphoria that humans normally feel, and it gives you greater self-control, vitality, and capacity for work. And so, as you might imagine, people who are trying to get work out of workers start to turn to cocaine. So in the United States in the early 1900s, while these Gilded Age businesses are just growing and growing, there's actually a decent competition between coffee and cocaine for keeping workers awake and productive long after any regular human would want to work. But like the United States does with alcohol, it starts to get a little more closed in the 1910s and the 1920s, and it starts to see these things as unnatural, which wasn't really new. When the Spanish first saw the Quechua chewing on the coca leaf, they said it was the work of the devil, for whatever reason, because it made you feel good, I guess. And so things like the 1914 Harrison Narcotics Act were passed in the United States, which severely limited the ability to produce cocaine. Some people, like Coca-Cola, were allowed to continue to use their secret recipe, but most people were not allowed to produce or use this drug. So the United States and Germany kind of stopped buying up the cocaine from Peru. And like rubber, the Dutch take advantage of this and they bring it to Indonesia, where they set up cocaine production all over East Asia, and they build up cocaine into a truly global drug. Peru doesn't outlaw cocaine, though, because it's something that had been used for centuries and was generally seen in a positive light, and often was taken in the form of the coca leaf, which helped in that high altitude Andes type situation. In fact, it's not until after World War II that Peru joins the United States in its anti-coca laws, which it eventually rolls back. But as a result of these laws, cocaine doesn't slow down in consumption. It does in some places. In the 1950s, it seems to fade away, but in the 1970s, Hollywood rediscovers it. Because Hollywood elites have a lot of money and can kind of operate outside of the law, they continued to import cocaine. But since it was not a legal drug, it was not sent directly from places like Huanaco in Peru directly to Hollywood. Rather, it had to go in a legal way, which set up the opportunity in the 1970s for countries like Colombia to become the middleman in an extremely lucrative trade. So the cocaine would start in the Andes, this shrub. It would be produced in, a lot of times, these German factories from the 19th century. Then it would be sent up to Colombia, where people like Pablo Escobar could become fabulously wealthy, refining it, marking up the price, and selling it to people in Miami who could then get it over to Hollywood. So it turns out that making this leaf sort of banned, making it taboo, and never rolling it back, like prohibition was rolled back in the United States, then made alcohol legal again, actually ended up creating a situation in which countries in Central America and northern part of South America could become extremely wealthy in the commodity trade, which is kind of interesting because if you think about all the other commodities that I've talked about on this city's podcast, they've gone through an enormous boom and then an enormous bust. So once sort of there's cheaper labor found, often in Asia or Africa, once people change the way you consume it by watering it down, like was the case of chocolate, the commodity market disappears. Or when synthetics are discovered, as is in the case of rubber, the commodity sort of lucrative part of the business disappears. Yet cocaine, we seem to be in the middle of the boom. It's still widely consumed in the United States. It's still the center of enormous drug wars in Central, South, and North America, and it's consumed even wider than products that I've also mentioned on this show. So we might be in the middle of the growth or the continued sort of success of this commodity. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future, because it doesn't seem like the violence, and which, was also sort of something that was around all these commodities, is going to go away and anytime soon. So it'll be interesting to see how this changes in the future, if it changes at all, because at the moment it seems like the coca leaf and cocaine have outlasted many of our other commodities mentioned on the show. Maybe not coffee. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this series on commodities that built cities, that ruled the world. They built nations, they built people, they built organizations, they built societies, and they continue to surround us in one way or another, whether or not the city in which they originated in is still significant in any way. But it does give you a certain appreciation for the sort of things that we still consumed and how small the world actually is. So once again, thanks for listening to the Cities podcast on Hour of History. Please do be sure to visit our sponsors at amazontrial.com/Hour of History, and drop us a line if you enjoyed the show. Tweet at us, mention us, subscribe to us. We appreciate any sort of interactions. Thanks a lot. And on Hour of History, it's our world, anytime, any place. Have a good one.
I could do cocaine if I wanted to.